From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today is a well-respected free flyer with a curiosity for various disciplines that include artistic free fly, big wave VFS, and even speed skydiving. If you're not familiar with Matt Fry, you've seen his work as he served as one of the organizers for this year's Max Pyro jump, which must be considered one of the most spectacular skydives ever made. Matt is also a key organizer working with Rook Nelson and others on the dive engineering for next year's Vertical Elite VFS World Record attempts to be hosted at Skydive Chicago in 2025. Though Matt is at a top level in the sport, his interests go beyond free fall, as he is a triathlete, scuba diver, and mountaineer. Matt Fry, welcome to the 20-Minute Call podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. What did I miss in that intro? What are there any disciplines you do that I overlooked there and or other sports?
Competitively, also MFS and VFS, but that sums me up pretty well.
I knew that I had that I was going to miss a couple of details there. So, all right, good deal. Matt, tell me about your background. Where are you originally from?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Colorado, but I did most of my coming of age in Northern Virginia, inside the DC metro area. That's where I did high school, college. That's where I was based when I started skydiving. And then about 8 years ago, I relocated back to Colorado.
So, East Coast guy, what kind of kid were you?
Rambunctious. My mother would tell me to go play in the street. She'll deny it now, but at the time, that was her favorite line. You know, get out of the house, go play in the street, get out of my hair.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have two younger sisters.
Based on what you described, would any of them be surprised that you live the lifestyle that you live now?
I don't think they're surprised in the slightest. Yeah, and I think they're happy with it too.
Yeah. Were there any early indicators or activities that would have said, oh yeah, he's going to be a professional skydiver?
No, nothing that comes to mind. As a young child, I enjoyed climbing and jumping off things and just being active like most children with ADD. But yeah, I don't think there were any precursors or writing on the wall.
Tell me about your family.
Father was career Air Force officer, so that had us moving around quite a bit. Then my mother was busy raising the three of us. And then picking up various part-time jobs in the meantime. And yeah, just bouncing around as a kid has its pros and cons, right? You are exposed to a lot of different people and parts of the country and the world, but you never really set down roots.
Oh, okay, interesting. So you were obviously exposed to aviation early on.
Yeah.
Tell me, you went to George Mason University. What did you study there?
Yeah, George Mason, I received my bachelor's in applied mathematics and applied physics, and then continued on to do my master's degree in applied physics.
Wow. Okay. So here's another dimension here. Tell me a little bit more of that. I'm guessing you were a pretty good student.
I was an atrocious student. I didn't want to do the busy work. So if you gave me an assignment that is just repetitive, I was not lazy, but I had a tendency to overextend. So I worked full-time, went to college full-time, and just had to prioritize my time. So my grades suffered as a result. But yeah, I really enjoyed learning the hard science and the hard maths.
What was it about, say, physics that attracted you to that? I mean, tell me a little bit about how your brain works.
Yeah, part of that, my dad studied physics when he was younger. So there's always a bit of a lineage thing, but it just had an appeal trying to explain why something is or how something works or understanding the underlying fundamentals of why anything.
So how is that translated into some of the sports or activities you're into today?
So now I try to take a more analytical look at trying to find big ways, for example, maybe make them more efficient or smoother or faster. I'm also not scared to be wrong. I don't want to be wrong, but in terms of science or math, like you're wrong often, and it continues to evolve and grow and improve and refine.
Interesting. So in terms of the work that you do, is any of that connected to physics or is that mostly an application to skydiving?
Yeah, so professionally, I work for the United States Patent and Trademark Office, doing quality assurance for them. And everybody who works there has to have an educational background in a hard science or engineering, because an inventor invents something brand new, never before seen or heard of, and they want to discuss it with you. So you have to have a certain level of knowledge base to have a peer-to-peer discussion.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds super interesting. So are you coming across really interesting inventions, speaking with inventors? When I first read that, I thought, oh, is he making sure that logos are in compliance and there's no trademark issues there? But it sounds beyond that.
Yeah, so trademarks and patents are kind of two different divisions of the USPTO. Usually when interacting with inventors, inventions are frequently a minor improvement to a known device or setup that has huge ripple effects, right? So we've invented a better semiconductor that now improves thin film transistors, that now makes your TV consume 10% less power, right? So I don't see a lot of big scale macroscopic like ideas or inventions. It's usually, here's a small improvement that has great implications.
So when you get something across your desk or computer, as it were, are you sometimes going, wow, that is a great improvement? I mean, it sounds like you enjoy your job with some of the interesting things you see.
Yeah, it's bittersweet. It's a fun office job, but it's still an office job. But it has the golden handcuffs where it's very conducive to the lifestyle I want to live, and it's very flexible, which I appreciate. Yeah, some of the inventions look really cool and really neat and appealing, but you don't always know what the final product will look like when it comes to market. So even though it looks cool on paper, they may never actually make it.
Got it. So Speaking of your lifestyle, I'm amazed by where you are. You travel a bunch and you're doing so much, whether it be with running triathlons or I suppose running, biking, swimming triathlons, scuba diving and mountaineering and major travel. How does that balance work? I mean, is it because you're able to be remote and work? Or are you taking a lot of time off? How does that work?
All of the above. So I do work remote, full-time from home, but we have flexible scheduling, which gives me a lot of flexibility in taking longer weekends without tapping into my vacation leave. And then I can save that for longer trips or international trips.
How did you get into this? It seems, I've never met anyone that worked at USPTO.
They were hiring when I graduated. So I graduated with my bachelor's and spent almost a year job hunting. And it was really difficult trying to find an entry-level position. This was also kind of the dawn of online application process. And so not every employer did it well. They were swamped with applications from all over. It was just odd and challenging. And the PTO gave me a job offer. I thought, surely I'll do this for 6 months, find something better and cooler. And now I'm at 15 years and change.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is kind of enlightening. I want to give you my impressions of you. Mm-hmm. Okay. Is when you first actually came across my radar, it was a picture of you, I think, emerging from the water or doing a triathlon. I was like, wow, this, aside from skydiving, there are so many interests that you have. And I was like, you're so top level in skydiving, and yet you're top level in a lot of other things as well. What makes you tick? Where does that drive come from? Because you're not these aren't little hobbies. These things are major time investments. Can you give me some insight to your personality that has you pursuing such big things?
Yeah, it's frequently goal-oriented. You see a friend or family member or whatever do something super cool, and you're like, wow, like a triathlon, that sounds really neat. And then how do I do that? And I start working backwards and thinking about like a training plan. Same thing with the skydiving world record. Like, oh, I want to be on a world record. How do I do that? What does my training plan look like? So I think I thrive when I have structure and a goal. If I don't have a goal or something I'm training or working toward, I kind of flounder aimlessly and I lose motivation. I sleep in, I drink too much. So I do well when I have something to work toward.
Did you have any regrets deciding that you do a triathlon? I mean, that's ridiculously difficult.
No, I absolutely loved it. I tried a sprint triathlon, which is a very small one. I'm like, oh, okay, that was manageable. Maybe I could do an Olympic. Tried the Olympic. Then a buddy and I worked together to work toward a half Ironman. And then I learned that an Ironman was coming up in 4 months. I'm like, all right, double down. And the Ironman was so much fun, really rewarding. I really enjoyed it. For sure, training for the Ironman was incredibly disruptive to the day-to-day lifestyle. As much as I would love to do one again, I'm not sure I would. I was training for the Ironman at Nationals 2 years ago, swimming 1.5 miles in the SDC pond at 4 a.m. It's just unpleasant. That was too much, but I really enjoyed it.
That's where I wonder about the regret, right? Like the training is so difficult, and being in the pond at Skydive Chicago 4 a.m. sounds to me, who likes to sleep in and likes his coffee before he can do anything. It sounds awful.
Well, it's also a matter of like priorities, I think. Could I have completed it with less training? Probably, but it would probably be unpleasant. If I'm going to spend time and money going to do a mountain, for example, I really want to maximize my chance of success. I don't want to be the reason it falls apart, especially not after you invest, again, all that time, money, and mental bandwidth, right? The mental fatigue is real.
Another thing I noticed is you're also scaling serious mountains and have spent quite a bit of time in Nepal. And I was curious about, Nepal to me is like an enchanting place. Everyone that I've ever known that's gone there comes away with a higher awareness of something. Would you share, I think the first question being what about mountaineering is so interesting to you? And then secondly, insights about Nepal.
Yeah, mountaineering, a lot of it I enjoy doing by myself here in Colorado. I'm kind of an introvert, and it gives me an opportunity to recollect, be away from people, and just enjoy something natural and beautiful while still challenging myself. Nepal was a unique experience. It wasn't quite what I expected. My last big mountaineering trip was Denali in Alaska, and Denali felt very clean. It's all snow and ice. It was just an incredible experience. Nepal, you're below the snow line. It's a little dirtier, more crowded, a lot more helicopters. So very enchanting and majestic views. But at other times, I was a little disgusted. I hate to say it, especially as I got toward the higher camps on Ama Dablam. They were just kind of dirty and disappointing.
I would imagine with the amount of people that travel out there to do that big thing, whatever that is, whether it be scaling Everest or just getting to base camp. But interesting. Yeah.
And I don't want to, something else that was different was out of almost a 5-week trip, I was only climbing 3 days. So you spend so much time just trying to get there and back, trekking essentially to Everest Base Camp, where you're stopping at guest houses and tea houses along the way. And if that's your jam, that's awesome. Go enjoy that journey. It just wasn't quite what I was envisioning for myself.
Matt, I'm so curious. Let's say VFS World Records is so all-encompassing that, or mountaineering is all-encompassing, or triathlons are so all-encompassing, but it seems like you have this, my perception of you is you're very curious. How does your curiosity go beyond the thing that you're doing that goes, all right, well, when I get done with this, I would like to go and maybe do that. Is that how your brain works? I don't really know that I'm asking a really great question there as much as I'm just really curious about, like, to me, man, I'll get so invested in something that I almost have tunnel vision. It almost seems like you don't have tunnel vision. It's like you're hardcore and then you're able to pivot. Is that right?
Yeah. I think it drives my fiance nuts and some of my friends as well. if we'll be in the middle of a long hike or something else, and my brain is neck deep thinking about the next skydiving event or the next hike we're going to do, or I'm rarely fully invested and focused on this one moment. I'm usually very scatterbrained, thinking about what's next.
If you're a DZO or DZM listening to this podcast and you're not using Burble, I've got a question. Why not? If the reason is price, what's the cost of your time? Other booking and manifest softwares are a one-size-fits-all. Burble was built from the ground up by a DZO for DZOs to maximize efficiency. Now, isn't that nice? There's no software that compares. Choose Burble. So let's talk about skydiving. How is it that you got into skydiving to begin with? What was the circumstance that led to that?
Yeah, so I tried a tandem. I couldn't tell you what year. It was just a birthday tandem, me and a buddy. We did it. We checked the box. It was super cool. It was fun, but it didn't hook me, especially the cost, $250. I was working retail. Like, I can't do this on a regular basis. But years later, another coworker asked me to go. I'm like, I did it. Don't want to spend the money. And they were like, no, you can do, it's called AFF. You can fly your own parachute, take a class and yada, yada. I'm like, all right, that sounds fun. So I went a second time, tried AFF. And that's where it started to hook me, because they told me about Cat B, Cat C. Here's the training progression. This is how you get into the sport. Oh yeah, by the way, this is a sport. And so I went back a month later, then a month later, and it just started snowballing.
Where did you make that first jump?
The first jump, the tandem, was at Skydive Orange in Virginia. And then AFF was at Skydive The Point in Eastern Virginia.
And then, so after AFF, I guess you're off to the races like the rest of us, or was your progression pretty steady?
There wasn't a lot of progression initially. I mean, I jumped heavily, but I immediately got into free flying. I think on jump 7 or 8, when we're doing flips, I got stuck in a sit. And I was told, oh, you're a free flyer now. Don't know what that means, but okay. So did a couple hundred jumps, kind of learning to video, doing bizarre novelty exits and jumps, and learning to maybe do a high five in a sit. And this is before, I mean, there were 3 tunnels on the whole East Coast. I think Rayford was still reasonably new, and that was about it. So it took a couple of years before I actually started focusing on self-improvement.
I read that when you had 1,000 jumps, you went to a skills camp for, Big Way, I guess, VFS.
Mm-hmm.
And that struck me, it's like, I imagine a lot of the folks there have way more jumps than 1,000 in that arena. Is Matt Fry a guy that gets intimidated? It seems like that would be a very intimidating thing to do. Were you intimidated, and what gave you the confidence just to even go to that camp?
Yeah, for sure. So this was at Invasion over New Year's 2011 to 2012. And I was still pretty new to head down. And I was just enthralled whenever I could do a head down jump with other people, because there were so few in the Mid-Atlantic. So it was technically a world record tryout, which I had no illusions of trying out. I just want to learn and be around other people who are better. But yeah, it was incredibly intimidating. I think I knew one person at the whole event, and I was in the smaller, less experienced group, but learned a lot, and very thankful for it.
Did you have any sense of what would come? I mean, when leaving there, you would be a sought after organizer in the space.
Zero clue. No idea. It felt very bite-sized. I went to that event. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I'll go to another one a few months later. This is cool. And then I went to more and more. And then lo and behold, I received an invite to the world record that year. Even just a few months beforehand, I never would have anticipated that was a realistic possibility. And
how was that experience when you went?
Phenomenal. Man, it was one of the best weeks of my life, for sure. The world record is almost over Summerfest, which is already an incredible event. Setting a world record, then celebrating with 1,000 friends. Okay, yes, please.
You mentioned that you're introverted, and you strike me, Matt, as someone that doesn't have a lot of ego. I mean, you just seem very settled in yourself. what excites you? What gets your brain going?
Right now, group accomplishments, like big ways specifically, really get me pumped. As much as I enjoy mountaineering or doing things like that by myself, when you're at the top of the mountain, what are you going to high five yourself? It's kind of boring. So it's nice sharing that experience and that group accomplishment with others. And that's kind of what I'm really focused on right now.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. As I understand it, I did an interview with Rook Nelson, and he was like, "Yeah, Matt Fry is working on the engineering of the VFS attempts for the world record." And I wanted to know more about that. What are you actually doing? How are you re-engineering? What is actually going to be different than, say, how it's been done before?
Sure. So previously, most of the head-down world records depend on pods and bridges, where we're building these usually 6-person pods where they're supposed to pick up their grip, turn their body, and then lock out. And it's kind of an awkward form to fly. At some point, you're just along for the ride, right? You can't really help very much for various reasons. This is obviously very different than how the FS flyers have been doing their world records since the 90s, right? They build those big sweeping whacker lines. For years and years, that kind of line has been a phobia in the vertical community. We call it cracking the whip because it gets a little motion, snaps people off the end. And that was a legitimate concern for many years. But now I think the skill level has risen so high and there's so many tunnels, it's not as, it doesn't have as big a presence as it did in the past. So we're essentially trying to plagiarize what all the FS flyers have been doing and apply that to vertical formations. Time will tell if that's a good change or not, but it's a change.
It almost sounds like your profession in receiving an update on something that already has been invented.
Mm-hmm.
So far with the training camps that you've been doing and the skills camps, what are you seeing? Do you feel like the concept of this new design is proving to be better?
Yeah, so far the feedback I've received from a lot of the participants has been positive. They like it more. It seems smoother, calmer. And frankly, they're just happy to do something different. We're still trying to refine the nuances, right? There's a couple alternatives and variations. Same with FS. If you look at the 300 way versus the 400 way, there's small differences. So we're still trying to fine tune those to figure out what will work best for us, which may not be the same as what's best in the future. So like this is faster, but may not be optimal for the next record. But let's keep it in the back pocket for the 250 way or whenever we go bigger.
Is there someone you're connecting with on the FS side? Because obviously there's a lot of nuance in FS that you may not be aware of. Mm-hmm. Who is that person?
Yeah, Dan BC, Sandy Grillett, Larry Henderson. I've reached out to as many people as I can think of, and they were incredibly helpful. Chatting with Rook Nelson and Melissa Nelson to get archives from what their father organized decades ago. Back in the day, FS flyers would sometimes make a documentary of their record attempts. And they're like, oh, here's the challenge we're having now. Here's what we're doing to fix it. And there's a lot of parallels, I think, to where we're at with the head down big ways.
Is there anything that surprised you in going down this path of discovery?
I expected crack the whip to be more of a problem, to be honest. Sure, let's try it, but I've been shocked how smooth it is. And by adding more flexibility in the formation design, it seems to have more stability, which that was kind of the theory, but I've been surprised how much that has been the case so far.
Is there a threshold where you go, in terms of size, minimum size, where you go, yeah, I think we should actually bring this to the table for next year? That would satisfy you, like, yeah, this is the viable option.
You mean in terms of like testing it out before we feel...
Yeah. So, I mean, I imagine with that whip cracking, if you're in smaller groups, maybe you get away with it, but obviously the variables expand as the size of the formation expands. Mm-hmm. So is there like, do you do 100 way and go, yeah, okay, well, 100 way, maybe that's a little bit excessive, but, is there like, all right, this is still stable in 50 way, we should bring this forward. Is there a threshold number that you're wanting to see success with?
200. But that's a great question. So we've done several 20 ways and a single 40 way event. Next month, we have 60 ways. And now we have 100 ways scheduled for May of 2025. So I think it's going to be an ongoing evolution. World records aren't easy, and a 200 way has never been done. So I'm confident even there, we're going to find new challenges and hurdles to kind of sort through. I think for a long time, we knew we were going to get a world record, right? You show up to a world record event, you're like, oh, we're going to get it. We don't know the size. We don't know which day, but now we have to earn it. And we have to acknowledge that we're trying something brand new, which for me really excites me. It's really cool having that challenge. When we eventually get it, and we will, it's going to feel so rewarding.
How did it feel for you personally not getting that record because of the level of effort that went into the last one? And everything that I see about you, Matt, you achieve. You tick the goal, and then it's on to the whatever. This is obviously is hanging in the craw of everyone was there. But tell me about your experience at the last event. Were you pretty disappointed, or?
Yeah, it's a roller coaster of emotion for sure. It's, disappointed, but also feeling blessed because of the camaraderie, right? Like we succeed as one, we fail as one, and we are here together, which is really nice. And then there's a small part of me that kind of enjoyed it because it means like, all right, like this is the glass ceiling. We can get through it, but we're going to have to work toward it, which I really like.
If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to invite you to be a member of a budding community with me on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests and gain access to some show swag. It's pretty sweet. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. Let's talk about Max Pyro.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen so many skydiving videos, and I would imagine this is a similar thing for you, is it takes a lot to capture my attention. With Max Pyro, I could not look away. And certainly with the edit that James put together, I could definitely not look away. Take me behind the scenes with that.
Sure. So I've been working with Konstantin Petrojuk for several years before that, either organizing various events or boogies with each other, or just goofing off for shenanigans, especially out in the desert. He invited me to help with the initial Max Pyro in 2020, just before the pandemic hit. We got mostly weathered out, which prevented an actual record. We had one night jump, but it was enough to hook everybody. It's like, oh, wow, we have to do this again. But it was a question of finding the right timing, getting past the pandemic. Konstantin joined the military, and doing the event without him was not an option. Over those same years, we worked heavily with Amy, Sarah, and Curtis. So it was a no-brainer putting the five of us together to work on Max Pyro 2.0.
So take me behind the scenes in terms of the risks involved, right? I mean, it's spectacular to see. What are you as a LO worried about? What could go wrong? I mean, we just see the end result, right? We have no idea of the technical challenges, but what concerned you about that project?
Yeah, everything. I was scared from conception to follow through. Just, it's an intimidating event with lots of unknowns and known unknowns, and I was unprepared and surprised how much planning Amy, Sarah, Curtis, Konstantin, and I did. We were meeting, I think, for an hour or two almost every week, every other week for a year. So not just traditional big way logistics, not just logistics of performing a stunt or logistics of a record, but putting it all together was just very consuming. Trying to think of, okay, the dangers of big ways, collisions, canopy, landing area, spot. There's just plenty of challenges in a big way safety-wise. Trying to jump with pyrotechnics, even in a small group, handling it correctly, wiring it correctly, making sure there's no issues on the plane, not burning somebody in free fall. What if there's an entanglement landing? Then night jumps. We have people landing in the dark. We need plenty of light. And then now it's a 40-way, and putting all of this together, there were just so many potential pitfalls, but it was really nice having that group of organizers to really work through everything. So there was a lot behind the scenes.
Clearly.
A lot of stress points. Yeah.
It sounds like step one, get someone with a good head on their shoulders, high skill set. Oh, by the way, knows how to handle pyro. Sounds like a lot of prerequisites just to be on that record.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always interesting. Every individual in their skydiving career follows a different path. And it's amazing when you meet someone with thousands and thousands of skydives, world championships, plenty of world records, and they're like, oh, I've done 2 night jumps, or never jumped pyro, or small things like that. The number of people who have done 40 ways at night with pyro is very small. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's happened even on the FS side. I don't know.
Any incidents that came up that needed to be overcome in that process, really on the day of the record?
No, I mean, there were always challenges for a record. There were always challenges with safety. And, without going into specifics, we addressed each one in kind. And we were happy to start the event with the same group we finished with. It's always a point of pride when you don't have to make any cuts. Yeah, so no complaints here.
Something that struck me about that, and tell me if I don't have this detail correct, is the amount of ground coordination with the pyro. Like, you guys land, and there's all this gear, and then you guys have to debrief or talk about it, but there is a crew that's taking care of all this pyro. Do I have that right?
Absolutely do. Yeah, the fire minions. So this was another safety concern we discussed ahead of time. If we want to do a world record, we obviously need to practice during the day. So now we're asking people to show up, jump during the day, then be ready for several record attempts at night, in which, we need several hours to re-rig all the pyro in between each attempt. That was just a big ask and could be very fatiguing. So we had this excellent crew, the fire minions, who were just absolutely fantastic. The event could not have been the same event without them. They essentially took charge of themselves. Like, we told them what they needed to do, and they self-managed. So we would land, they would immediately take our spent pyro and brackets and wiring and start dismantling, setting up the next one for the next jump. And then they would also troubleshoot any that didn't activate, like what was the problem. We also used them to help hold us accountable for safety inside the hangar, right? We really didn't want these pyrotechnics inside the hangar, just in case something might go off early or late. Certainly not around somebody else's very expensive gear. So the minions were critical to the event for sure. And I appreciate that they leaned into it. They got little minion outfits. It added this extra sense of levity to what could be a stressful endeavor.
It's one thing to think about. And now, as you've expressed that, it makes sense to me why you all had to meet so much. It's not just about the engineering in the sky, but what do you do with all this stuff that can create damage when we're not in the sky? Yeah, there's a lot of variables to think about. Is there a Max Pyro 3.0 in the works?
There are discussions. It might take a couple different forms. I don't think the next one would be a record attempt, but maybe more a focus on cool visuals with pyrotechnics in the sky, where we can focus on perhaps more dynamic flying, something better for the observer. But right now, I think we're still kind of enjoying the afterglow of Max Pyro 2.
I couldn't help but wonder if someone in Hollywood would have seen that and think that needs to be in a movie because the visuals were so spectacular. Have you all been approached by anyone with either any kind of commercial interest for that visual? I
have not, but I'm not sure about the others.
Well, I think someone should because it was pretty great.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be cool.
Before we proceed on, I actually want to go back in your skydiving career a little bit. It fascinated me that you were into speed skydiving, and I was keen to know what about that discipline attracted you so much.
I was at nationals competing in VFS and MFS, I think that year, and had the time to sign up and just for shits and giggles. I love competition, and I was just kind of curious. My schedule allowed it. Also, I'm not going to lie, there's a bit of ego there because some of the speed skydivers aren't really free flyers. So it's kind of like, I know how to fly head down, just kind of curious, right? So I tried it, did all over the spectrum, not really good, not really horrible, just meh. But I got an invite to the World Cup off of it. I was like, oh, okay, I'll put some more time into this. Yeah, it's worked out the last year and a half as I take a break from VFS. So it's just something different. And it's kind of nice in some ways when I want to go train. I don't have to coordinate with 4 other people. I just go to the drop zone and train. So it's just a little different.
In speaking with Maxine Tate, who definitely put in a lot of training time into her speed skydiving endeavor, one thing that was interesting to me was as she was getting or picking up high speed, sort of getting, I don't know what the official term of it is, but really sort of starting to wobble and losing stability. Have you found that to be the case for you as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, the speed wobbles are just this demon that's always there. What's really intriguing to me about speed skydiving is I can't figure it out for the life of me. And I don't want to quote anybody, but I don't think I'm the only one, right? When you chat with the speeder, when they're walking in from the landing area, you're like, hey, how was it? They're like, I don't know. If they say it was good, it was really bad. If they said it felt bad, it was a really good one. And for some reason, I cannot correlate how I felt on the jump with what I think my speed actually is. So for sure, back to the speed wobbles, as you start getting closer and closer to your maximum speed, you start wobbling, and that starts slowing you down as you're generating essentially lift by no longer being streamlined.
It sounds like a physics challenge.
Yeah. And for the life of me, I can't figure it out. So Marco Hepp, who's the world champion right now over in Germany, I think he worked with some physicists over there and went to a horizontal wind tunnel, and they started digging into the design of the container, the design of the jumpsuit, optimal locations for hands and feet, which is really neat. And it frustrates me, which is why I kind of find it interesting.
I was going to say, it sounds like your days of speed skydiving are not over quite yet until you get further understanding in this thing.
Not yet, but I distract easily.
I wanted to mention Constantine. From my research about you, it seems like you two have been thick as thieves from early days. Tell me about Constantine and what that friendship means to you.
Oh, Con's one of my best friends for sure. And it's funny you say that because I think at least once a year we come across a photo from Facebook memories or something like that. And it feels like an archaeological dig. Like I think I saw a photo not long ago from Carolina Fest 2013. It was a great skydive. I'm like, wait a minute, is that Constantine? Were we on that same awesome jump together and didn't know each other? So we continue to predate our friendship further and further back.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So are there any other disciplines that have you curious that once you get past VFS world record that you have your eye on?
Well, this year I'll be digging into VFS 4-way much more heavily. In the future, I would love to go compete in belly just to try it. But it just comes down to prioritization of time and money, and you can only be spread so thin.
Who do you admire in the sport?
Woof. Man, a lot of people. Like Dan BC is for sure very high up there in my regard.
Let's lean into that. Why? What about Dan strikes you?
I really appreciate that his history, his competitive nature, and his desire to lift up those around him. And after decades and decades and decades of doing it, his enthusiasm doesn't seem to have waned one bit. When I competed in artistic freefly, we were based at Paris, and having BC there just as an example was very motivating. You know, for some reason, should I do push-ups? Are you impressed? Like, I don't know. There are few skydivers I've so wanted to like have approval of, or if that makes any sense. So I appreciate the example he sets. Even on Facebook, he's posting on the beginner skydiving forums all the time. That's amazing. I can't think of too many skydivers with his history and experience still reaching out to the youngest and newest of us with that level of encouragement and knowledge.
Absolutely right. He is awesome. Mm-hmm. He's awesome. It's cool, too, to hear you express as someone that is in a different discipline than what you're accustomed to entirely, you hold in such high regard. That's very cool to hear. That's a risky question I ask you because there's risk that you may leave somebody out. So I recognize it's not really a fair question, but what are the characteristics of some of the folks that you look up to exhibit, other than, say, BC, that you admire?
I appreciate coaches, organizers, and mentors that help provide a path for someone to improve or train or learn or accomplish. You know, it's one thing to make a plan for today. It's another thing to have grandiose goals. Like someday I'm going to X, Y, and Z. But I really appreciate when someone can say, like, here's how you go from step A to step B to arrive at your final goal. And I think that's challenging. And I think whenever somebody's new or learning, they appreciate that and they latch onto it a little more.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help drop zones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. Tell me about your daily routine, Matt. You know, you are a high achiever. You got a lot done. And when I hear that, I think, well, there must be some structure and consistency and habits. What's a typical day look like for you?
I don't think I have a typical day because I travel so much and I'm so busy. Every day is just a little different. And then if the weather is right and the conditions are good, I want to go take a ski day. So at least when I'm home, every day is pretty different based on the needs of today or the needs of an event coming up. So I don't really have a typical day.
How does it work with your travel? Typically for someone like me, I'm in a routine and then I travel and I get out of routine. Mm-hmm. How are you able to maintain maybe your health or your fitness when you are traveling so much?
Yeah, it's a lot easier when I have something specific I'm training for, whether it's a mountain and I have a training plan I have to stick with, or a triathlon where I have a training plan to stick with, or I'm much more motivated to focus on my health and self-care when I'm working toward kind of a physical challenge of sorts. When I don't have one on the calendar, I'm a little lazier. I want to sleep in a little more, and I don't take as good care of myself.
You almost make it sound like you let yourself go a little bit, but I doubt that that's actually the case. Do you read books? Do you consume a lot of either audio or physical books?
Both. I love sci-fi and fantasy. Love nerding out over them, both in audio format, paper format, ebook. Usually I'm reading on my phone on the plane. Yeah, love to read.
If you were to recommend a book that has profoundly impacted you or influenced you, is there a recommendation you'd make?
Oh gosh, nothing that screams to mind right this minute, because so many of them are light and fluffy, I'll call them. I'm trying to check out and not have profound growth. When I try to read nonfiction or self-help, it usually puts me to sleep pretty quick. Usually I read to check out.
Do you consume podcasts?
No, not very much anymore.
I'm always curious to know what people are reading and what they're listening to. I'm a podcast junkie. I do consume a lot in so many different categories. So it's always interesting to know what people like yourself who are doing a lot of things, what you're consuming. So I always find that interesting. In terms of time management, how do you manage that? Particularly when you're doing so much, you're on the road. Is that a key component for your success?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is just prioritization. I try to get the most challenging tasks or most important tasks done early in the day when I'm most aware and awake. Otherwise, I just have to triage what needs the most attention or time right now.
Let's pretend that you are retired from skydiving. Mm-hmm. If you were to reflect on your career, any highlights that you feel most proud of thus far?
Yeah, I'm really proud with seeing the growth of sequential world records and Max Pyro. And really, if we can get this 200 way, that I'm going to be over the moon. I'm kind of viewing that as like this long reaching goal, 10 years in the making. And I'm so enthusiastic and nervous. That's what I'm really looking forward to. I don't look back too much, to be frank, just kind of, we did it. That was fun. Next project. So right now, the 200 way and the 100 way upright world record later this year are kind of the two 100 and 200 mega benchmarks, huge goals. And that would be a nice feather in the cap.
That would be huge.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm always interested in with my guests, Matt, is what I term as crossroads moments. I mean, nothing radical there, but in my life, there have been certain moments that had I not done something as simple as meet a key person out of the blue, seemingly, my life would be dramatically different than how I live my life today. And it doesn't have to be a person. It could be an event or, any kind of something where you're going in one direction and then this meeting or this decision takes you in another direction.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe a crossroads moment that, had it not occurred, maybe you and I are not speaking right now?
Yeah, there's probably quite a few in my life. In skydiving, one that always stands out to me was the freefly money meet in Eloy in 2010. So at the time, I was still a pretty new free flyer at Skydive the Point. And there's maybe 3 free flyers in the whole mid-Atlantic area, no tunnels. And so mostly just goofing off, skydiving, just, woo, I want the likes on MySpace. And that was it. No real aspiration or goals in the sport. I was enjoying my small drop zone and just having a good time. But a friend convinced me to go to the free fly money meet in Eloy. This was the first time I left my drop zone. And man, it opened my eyes to everything. First, seeing a big drop zone like Eloy is just what an incredible transition. Like, oh, wow, this is actually a huge sport. And it's a well-oiled machine and just an incredible experience. And then going to a free fly competition. I haven't really done any competitions. I haven't had any objectives or goals or feedback to this point. And so it was neat seeing, and I'm beginner, right? I can barely high five anyone, but it's neat seeing all these other free flyers there who can actually do cool stuff. Amy Sheen-Lecky's there, Sarah Curtis is there, Steve Curtis is there. And it's like, oh, this is actually a sport. You can actually compete and do things and do really cool things. Inside the hangar, they have all these rad pictures of formations that in my small little bubble, I just never really saw. Social media was still relatively new. And it was really inspiring. And then I remember one jump, I don't know, it was a so-so jump, but the judges dinged me and my teammate, and Steve Curtis is in there like passionately advocating for us. And I'm like, man, I don't know this guy from Adam, but he is so passionate about what's happening right now. And it was just neat seeing somebody else care that much. So almost immediately after, I returned home and started seeing the value of, okay, I'll travel to other drop zones. I'll go to boogies. I'll go to the tunnel and start learning. Started traveling around more and more to find coaches and organizers and opportunities to improve. Yeah, and in that process, eventually started going to the head down big way camps down in Sebastian, flying with all the guys from Standard and learning to fly big ways. And that slowly got me into the big way circuit. And then further, it kind of affected me in a lot of ways. In the process of going to all these boogies and events with organizers, it became clear that the person organizing the skydive isn't always the best flyer there or the most experienced flyer there. Sometimes it's just the one person willing to step up and say, hey, I have an idea. Let's try this. So out of a selfish desire to have more free flyers at my home drop zone, I tried bringing a money meet to my drop zone, trying to mimic or mirror what they did in Eloy, obviously with much smaller turnout, but it went well. And one of the guys was so enthused and had so much fun. He's like, hey, you have to come organize. You have to come organize at my boogie at Skydive Orange and weekend organize. And this is David Waibenga, and he was just so passionate. I loved it. And it was great. And he just lifted up those around him. He's like, you have to come do this. We had a great time. Please, please, please. And so I did. And then that slowly got me into the path of organizing. And then over time, organizing and records, once you have one, you get invited to more. And they just snowballed and eventually merged.
Amazing. Amazing answer. And that cued off a couple other quick questions. What makes a good organizer?
Man, there's so many factors. It depends. Is this a boogie? Is this a record? Is this a camp? Number one, I think lift up the people around you, right? Nobody wants to go to an event. This is expensive. This is time. People could be doing anything else, but they want to come be in a hot, stinky airplane with you. Yeah, lift them up. They should feel good. I also think they should learn a little bit. If it's a boogie, they may not be inspired, but trying to find a skydive that is challenging but obtainable. Same with a camp, trying to keep these bite-sized increments of improvement while continuing to lift them up, right? That jump didn't go bad. We learned the fall rate, we learned the timing, we learned the spacing, the exit. Just because it didn't all build, we got all these important factors out of it. So there's always a silver lining.
Based on what you just said, Matt, I'd like for you to be my coach. That I could tell you'd be a great coach for sure. One thing you mentioned earlier is when you were doing Max Pyro, mm-hmm. you said you were scared. Mm-hmm. Are you involved with a lot of things that scare you? And do you like being scared?
I don't like being scared per se, but when you're doing things for the first time, it's intimidating and a little scary. That could just be me. Same thing with certain triathlons or races or Max Pyro. It's a combination of nervous excitement when you're looking around and you're like, oh, I am surrounded by professionals everyone here is good at what they do, but also just, it's a little scary. We're trying something that's at least new for me. Even in big ways or big way camps, like this permutation, this combination of people, planes, everything is a little different. And we all want the best outcome, and we're scared to have a negative outcome.
In our sports, certainly we lose people in time. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to VFS or canopy piloting, it can be intimidating to get into it. I know that we have a lot of jumpers that are listening that would love to be more involved, but maybe they're in a bubble at their drop zones. And maybe that next step feels rather intimidating, either because the risk goes up or fear or whatever. What advice would you give to folks listening that want to get to that higher level, that next step? What would you say that they need to do to help bridge the gap to make that next step safely?
Yeah, just go say hi. Go talk to more people. Go travel more. Don't be intimidated by somebody with 20, 30,000 skydives. Go introduce yourself and chat with them. And that's the first place to start, right? Just don't be scared about saying hi.
Yeah, which requires courage all unto itself. Matt, I've really enjoyed our conversation. An hour has flown by, and I really appreciate all that you're doing for the sport. My admiration of you, and the reason why I wanted to speak with you today, is you just seem to go about your business without any pomp or circumstance, and you're doing everything at an extremely high level. And I like the way you operate. You're a professional. There doesn't seem to be any ego involved. You're having fun at what you're doing. You like challenging yourself, and you seem very approachable, which is awesome because I've met a lot of unapproachable skydivers with resumes similar to yours. So thank you for all you're doing for the sport and inspiring others like myself.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.